In this video, we're going to learn the locked hemming stitch as described on page 178. This is a variation of the hemming stitch, so if you haven't watched that video, go ahead and watch that one first before learning this. So I have my piece of fabric folded up twice like a hem, as well as a needle that's been threaded with a single thread doubled and tied in a knot at the end. Just like the hemming stitch, I'm going to turn my fabric perpendicular to get a better handle on holding my thread, needle, and fabric. So I'm going to start by on that lower edge going back to front to hide my knot up into the hem. I'm going to move about a ½ inch from where I put my knot, take a tiny bite of the upper part of the fabric, send my needle through the lower part of the fabric and pull tight. This is exactly like the hemming stitch. Now instead of just moving on to the next stitch like I would in the normal hemming stitch, we're going to put the lock in, where we take another stitch coming up from under the stitch you just made, but only through the hem allowance. This creates that horizontal little lock line that really adds some stability to this stitch. So now we're going to move on to the next stitch. Pick up the next little bite of fabric about a ½ inch distance away from your previous stitch and send it through the bottom layer seam allowance. Now again, from behind the stitch you just made, without going through the upper layer at all, we'll just send our needle back through that hem seam allowance. Move a ½ inch, take a tiny bite, and create that lock up under the previous stitch, just through the hem seam allowance. Continue this all the way down your fabric. At the end, we'll get ready to tie our knot. So I'll finish the last lock and then just take a bite on just the hem seam allowance. Send your needle back through the loop you created to tie your first knot. And we'll go ahead and tie a second. Again, just through the hem seam allowance. We don't want to see this knot on the outside of the fabric. Trim your thread, and you've done that locked hem stitch. Again, this is just a really solid, heavy duty stitch that'll hold up to a lot of wear because you've locked it in, and it's still pretty non-intrusive on the outside of the fabric.